Let's just dive right in with a huge question, one that gets to the very heart of what it means to be human. Does the language you speak actually shape your reality?
Okay, how about a little thought experiment? Try it with me right now. Can you think of something, anything, that you can't quite put into words? Maybe it's that very specific ache you feel for a place you've never been, or the exact color of the sky right before a storm. It feels like the thought, the feeling, is there first, right? And the words just kind of struggle to catch up? But what if it's not that simple?
And that brings us to our first big idea, this really complex relationship between what's going on in our heads and the words we have to talk about it.
So here's the crucial idea. We tend to think of language as just a tool for getting our thoughts out. But it's so much more than that. It actually provides the mental boxes, the filing cabinets that we use to sort and make sense of the world. It's less of a microphone and more like the operating system our brain is running on.
And this whole idea that language can be a lens or even a trap has a pretty dramatic origin story. It didn't start in some quiet university library. No, it started in the middle of a disaster, which led one guy to a pretty shocking conclusion.
Let me introduce you to Benjamin Lee Whorf. What's so fascinating about Whorf is that he was not your typical academic. His day job, he was a fire prevention engineer. But in his free time, he was this incredibly passionate, self-taught linguist diving into ancient languages. And that unique combo gave him a very, very practical view of how words work in the real world.
So Whorf was investigating a fire at this warehouse, and he stumbled onto something wild. See, some workers had stored a bunch of gasoline cans on a loading dock. The key detail? They were all labeled empty. So the workers, taking a smoke break, treated these cans like they were totally harmless. I mean, empty means there's nothing in it, right? It's inert. But an empty gas can is actually full of highly flammable vapor, which is way more dangerous than liquid gas. All it took was one carelessly tossed cigarette, and boom, the entire place went up in smoke. And this is where Whorf had his big light bulb moment. He argued that this wasn't just a physical accident, it was a semantic one. The word empty created a mental blind spot. It didn't just describe the cans, it totally changed how the workers perceived them, and that directly led them to behave in a way that caused a catastrophe.
This line of thinking eventually grew into a formal theory, a really famous one that comes in two very different flavors, a super extreme version and a much more moderate one.
And here it is, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, named for Whorf and his mentor. The big idea is that the very structure of the language you speak, its grammar, its vocabulary, either flat out determines, or at the very least, influences the way you think about and see the world.
Okay, so the hypothesis basically splits in two. The strong version, called linguistic determinism, is, well, it's pretty radical. It says language is a prison for your mind. If you don't have a word for a concept, you literally cannot think about it. Your thoughts are just trapped by the words you know. Then there's the weak version, linguistic relativity, which is way more accepted these days. It says language isn't a prison, it's more of a guide. It carves these comfortable channels in your brain, making it easier and more natural to think along certain paths.
If you want the perfect pop culture example of that strong language is a prison idea, look no further than George Orwell's 1984 and the fictional language Newspeak. The whole point of Newspeak was to shrink the dictionary so much that rebellious ideas, like freedom, would become literally unthinkable simply because the words to express them were gone. That's linguistic determinism in its most terrifying dystopian form.
So is there any real evidence for this stuff? Well, the most famous example, and you've almost definitely heard this one, is about words for snow. Whorf claimed that because Inuit languages have tons of words for snow, their speakers must actually perceive snow differently than, say, an English speaker. The problem is, this whole idea got blown way, way out of proportion. The original observation from a linguist named Franz Boas only mentioned 4 distinct root words.
And here's the reality check. When you actually stop and think about it, English has plenty of words for snow too. We've got blizzard, slush, flurry, powder, dusting. A professional skier probably has a huge vocabulary for different snow conditions, while someone living in Florida might just have the one word. So it's not really that language is trapping perception, it's that our needs and our environment shape our vocabulary. We make up words for the things that are important to us.
Okay, so if language isn't a prison, how exactly does it work as a guide in our day-to-day lives? Let's look at a couple of really concrete examples where the way we use words can have some pretty dramatic effects.
This uncovers a kind of hidden structure in our thinking. We live by metaphors. For instance, the deep-seated metaphor that argument is war.
Just think about how we talk about disagreements. Your claims are indefensible. You attack every weak point. You demolish someone's argument. You shoot down ideas. This isn't just flowery language. This entire frame makes us act like we're in a battle, focusing on winning instead of, understanding.
This also shows up in how direct we are with each other. Direct speech is obvious. Take the garbage out. Indirect speech is a lot more subtle. It just kind of hints at what you want. Wow, the garbage can is full. Which style you choose depends on your culture, the situation, and really importantly, power dynamics. And sometimes that choice can have life or death consequences.
Picture this, January 13th, 1982. Air Florida Flight 90 is sitting on a snowy runway in Washington, D.C. The co-pilot is getting really nervous about the ice building up on the wings. But instead of saying, "Stop, this is too dangerous, we can't take off," he uses really indirect language. This quote is from the plane's black box. He calls it a losing battle, a false sense of security. He's hedging. He's phrasing a critical safety warning as a casual observation.
And this timeline is just heartbreaking. The co-pilot, who is the subordinate in the cockpit, keeps using this indirect language to talk to the captain, his superior. He says things like, "That doesn't seem right, does it?" The captain, who maybe isn't picking up on the extreme urgency coded in that language, just kind of brushes him off. They take off, and just 37 seconds later, the plane slams into the Potomac River.
74 people lost their lives. It was a catastrophic failure where the choice of words, this reliance on indirect speech in a high-stakes power dynamic, played an absolutely fatal role.
So, let's pull all this back together. After all that, what does this actually mean for how you see the world every single day?
All right, so where do most scientists and linguists land on this today? Well, the strong version, that language is a prison, is pretty much off the table. We can clearly think of things we don't have words for. But that weak version, that language is a guide, that holds up really well. It doesn't trap us, but it does carve those well-worn paths that our thoughts are most likely to follow. And of course, it's a two-way street. Our experiences and thoughts shape our language, and then our language turns around and shapes our thinking.
And that leaves us with one last question. And this one's for you to think about. If your language is carving the channels of your thought, what paths are you walking down every day without even realizing it? Think about the metaphors you use, the words you choose, how direct or indirect you are. How are they quietly, invisibly, shaping your version of reality right now?